So as we continue, thank you. As we continue, did I tell you guys I found out there's a laser pointer on this thing? It's like real strong too, like I can shine it like all the way back in the back of the worship center from here. Anyway, I'm just saying this as I don't have a good transition as people walk through. So, but I got my clicker, we're ready to go. It's hard to believe that we're rounding the corner on the whole Holy Bible year. We were in a meeting yesterday. It's, for those who might not know, we've been in a year called the whole Holy Bible. We're reading through Scripture, both New Testament and Old Testament. The weekend sermons have dealt with the New Testament exclusively, but a lot of us have been walking through the Old Testament as well, and we find ourselves in the letters right now of the New Testament, hence the title. It was interesting. We were at a staff meeting yesterday, and next year's theme, so whole Holy Bible is this year's theme. Next year's theme was referenced last year, not what it is, but just, for whatever our theme for 2024 ends up being. And it's tricky for me, at least, to think about not being in the whole Holy Bible. Like, we've been doing it for so long that I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess we are going to move on for this. But before you ask, no, I don't know what the theme is for next year. They won't tell me because they know that if I knew, I would tell you. I would just tell you, and they know that, so they didn't tell me. But for right now, we're rounding a corner on these series of letters, and this week is Colossians. And Pastor Mike said it really well at our staff meeting yesterday, because the weekend is going to focus on Colossians as well. So if you don't like this sermon about Colossians, just come this weekend, and it'll be you hear Mike do it. And but he mentioned something that I think is really true. He was saying, as we get kind of deeper into this big, long list of letters, a lot of people don't mention, like, a lot of people like Philippians, right? Like, some people are like, oh, I love this verse from Ephesians. Not everybody loves the verses from Colossians. A lot of people don't point to that as their favorite letter from Paul, but it is a really fantastic piece of work. And you might be noticing as you read through these that similar to the Gospels having some shared content, a lot of Paul's letters to early Christians and these early church communities also have kind of similar pieces that Paul hits throughout, Galatians and all these different pieces. He mentions a lot of the same things, but they're slightly different as they have their own individual spin as Paul addresses the individual needs of that particular community. Now, the whole premise of our series is to look at what Paul could be teaching us through these letters as we're rounding the corner on what I like to think of, and I've said it for the last couple weeks, the real New Year. We should just change the year number now because it's the new school year, right? This is the true, real New Year, and as we head into it, we head into the season of fall, and everybody feels that excitement. Maybe that's just residual training from when we were all in school, getting ready. You're like, did anybody else they're like, well, need to back to school shop. Right? They're like, well, I need some new pants. I need some new shoes. Back to school. It's fine, even though you haven't been in school for however many years. This is the real New Year, and with a lot of that refreshing, that getting ready for the fall, busting out the flannel again someday when it's not 400,000 degrees outside. After we do all of that, we're also going to need to hopefully walk in a renewed spirit as well. It's not just, can we get ready for the new season? From an outside perspective, it's can we as people head into this real new year refreshed in a new way? And so we're looking at what Paul might have for us. And as always happens around the turn of the season, I'll talk about some similarities with the calendar in this. We've gotten some emails. Good old Lutheran Church of Hope. These emails are the type of emails we've gotten many times before, and they generally ramp up roughly every 4 years. Because it coincides with this thing that happens every 4 years. The Olympics. No, I'm just kidding. No, emails like, we as Hope should take a stronger stance about this particular issue. Why isn't Hope endorsing XYZ candidate? And this is from every possible political spectrum, right? Why doesn't Hope taking a stronger stance on that particular sin? Notice that the people that send those emails, it's never a sin that they're dealing with. Isn't it funny how that works? Nobody wants to talk about their sin, but they want to talk about other people's sin. Isn't that funny how that works? Anyway, just you need to know that we noticed that. Before you get too antsy, I'm not making this an uncomfortable political thing, as I hope to make it a very not political thing. The reason that these types of emails, correspondences, whatever, seem to come around every election cycle after election cycle is because when we start to evaluate our very important big decision as voting as a country, it highlights a lot of our ideological differences that we have with other people, and has long been found out by politicians everywhere, from every part of the political spectrum, that if we are able to make people afraid of the other, whoever that represents for you, then they will cling even tighter to our own sense of morality. If we can convince someone that they, wherever they are, is against our God, then they know that they become our enemy and we become the comrade in the fight against the morality. It's perfect, then, that we arrive at this book of Colossians, this letter, as Paul puts it so beautifully, that we here in the 21st century can learn from it. Instead of referencing allegiance to one particular side or ideology, he evokes this idea of being alive versus dead, refreshed in new life. He doesn't talk about pledging allegiance to a country or a party. We do that in our own country, just as other people do in their own countries. But Jesus is here for us all. He doesn't talk about all of that picking sides. He talks about actually experiencing the very nature of the gift of life from the God Almighty. I say this so when we read in a moment our passage from Colossians, we can really take in this very zoomed out perspective of Scripture that Paul gives to us, and we can perhaps see it with fresh eyes. See how just wide-ranging and not see how it's trying to look at the bigger picture, all right? So we're going to look at Colossians chapter 3. If you are a paper Bible person like yours truly, feel free to flip in that. You can also Google it with your phone. Your brain makes more and better connections if you see the words in front of you. And you say, Chris, why don't you just put the words on the screen? It's strategic because I want you to do it. Cool. I'll give you a second because I'm going to find it too. Colossians chapter 3. You know we're close to the year of the whole Holy Bible because that's how much we got left. It's not a lot, right? Colossians chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 5. I'm reading from the NIV. Verse 5. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. Pause. Those sins are not why the wrath of God is coming. Not those sins specifically. That's what this particular community was struggling with. And Paul's point here is that sin is the reason that the wrath of God is coming. It is those sins that he listed are not more or less egregious than any other. Just important point. Sometimes this verse is used in that way. Unpause. Verse 7, you used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Basically, he's saying, yeah, you know that other stuff that you know is bad, but you also got to get rid of anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Verse 9, do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Pastor Mike likes to make the joke that we have the left wing, the right wing, the whole bird here at Lutheran Church of Hope. And I know that's definitely true here at Men of Hope as well. That gets to be true in our church community because we can care about politics and policy and our elected officials, and we definitely should, right? But don't for 1 second Put all of that on the same level that the God of the universe died for each and every one of us. Indeed, did you catch the last piece of that? He named the different pieces of the way that people used to divide themselves back in the day and say, as far as God is concerned, those things don't even exist. It's not that those differences weren't real. Circumcised versus uncircumcised, you're like, Chris, it's easy to know. But it's not that those differences don't exist. It's that as far as importance goes, Paul's pointing to this and saying, we're all level with God. As far as the ultimate importance, the Christian community that we're all called to live in, it doesn't even exist. We definitely don't, he's saying, identify as one faction or another over being the followers of Jesus. The temptation over the next year or so is to fall into this trap that one side or the other is representing the truth and the way. And by voting for that, you're proving that you're on the right side. But as Danny so wisely preached a couple weeks ago during the weekend services, God's loving action and grace comes before we can do anything. So our experience of the world comes from that place, not so we can earn it. We already have it. We get to live from that place. And you might say, that doesn't make any sense, Chris. You say, I see you, all you yahoos at Lutheran Church of Hopes with your bookstore, Cafe Hope, and Perry was teasing me because I couldn't think of the name of it earlier. Cafe Hope. I see you with your bookstore and your good coffee and your cool worship leaders and your contemporary songs, right? You're like, I see people raising their hands in the air, wearing the T-shirts and all that. You say, I know that you're just doing this to prove that you're some cool, accessible church, right? You're saying you're just trying to prove that you belong here. And really, that's just a contemporary version of holier than thou. Maybe you felt like that in the past. My response to that, maybe some people coming are in that space. Maybe people are coming and just really trying really hard because they feel like they need to go through these motions. And I'm so sorry if you're in that spot, because you could be going through the motions so close to the real stuff and miss the main point. Because the people around here who have stuck around for virtually my entire lifetime, the people who serve, the people who help lead as volunteers, these people have a certain life about them. I've heard plenty of guys and men of hope say, like, yeah, I met this guy. He's awesome. I'm like, oh yeah, he's been around forever. And they're like, hey, he's really great. I don't know what it is, but he's really there's just something about that guy. That's the stuff. It's the experience of the presence and love of God. And when you have that, it changes the way that you both see things and the way that you engage with the world around you. All of a sudden, you live from a place of being loved instead of attempting to do the things to prove that you're loved. Does that make sense? We're starting from that place. And I know this is a continuation of what we've talked about in these other letters as well. These ineffable, meaning words don't work for it, these ineffable, unspeakable experiences really lead us in a different mode of life. Paul gives a list of struggles that the Colossians are going through, right? The malice, the rage, the slander, and all those things. Well, Paul also gives us a list of struggles that the Colossians were going through as well, which are similar to others in others' letters, but also highlights what God leads to us instead. So we're going to pick up where we left off, and that's going to be in verse 12. Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. Therefore, if you ever see, they say this in seminary, if you ever see a therefore, look at what it just said. The therefore tells you what it's there for, okay? So the word is hina in Greek. It's basically saying, you're supposed to do all of this. Therefore, and so, as God's chosen people, this is the main point, as God's chosen people, as that title instead of the ways that divide us. As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with gentleness, and with patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Not say, well, we just vote different and push them across to the edge of the room. I added that part. Verse 13, bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone, and forgive as the Lord forgave you. If you're saying, why? Why should I? Because God forgave you. Verse 14, and over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace. And be thankful. Verse 16, let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs of the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or in deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Where our natural broken dispositions will lead us to anger. I have two columns here, 3:8 and 3:12. They line up actually really nicely. It's almost as if Paul is making a point here. This master of the law is making a very smart point. It's because he is. All right. So, where one leads to anger, the way, which is what following Jesus was called back in the day. The word Christian wasn't invented until much later. It was known, though the language translates to the way, the people following the way of Jesus. Where one leads to anger, the way leads with compassion. Where one acts in rage, the way acts in kindness. Where one looks towards others in malice, a bitterness in your heart, the way relates to them with humility. Where one attacks with slander, the way moves in gentleness. Where one reacts with filthy language, the way reacts with patience. Notice that one ends up pushing others away in our lives and the other gathers close in community. So if you're ever wondering, or if you've ever been one of those people that's like, why can't Hope just be bolder and just really just try to tell people about their sin? And I'm just not taking strong enough stances. We're taking a strong stance. Because if it doesn't look like this, we're falling short. That might not look like the boldness that you're looking for, but then I would ask you to check your own heart. What is your goal in pointing out other people's sin? Because we're trying to look like this, right? And notice that one of these lists comes pretty natural and pretty easily to all of us. The way is hard. You can't treat this like a recipe for Christian life, like where you're just going to try to throw in the ingredients and hopefully it all comes together pretty well. No, to truly live the way, and I'm not talking about an action. I'm talking about feeling these things in your heart and making them true for yourself. Truly living that in your heart and making that your actual disposition of the way that you see things. In order to have that happen, we have to encounter the grace of God. We can only fake it for so long. And here's the thing, like it's both for both of us, right? We all fall short, and this ends up being part of our day. But I'm talking about shifting dispositionally so that we're able to encounter people in our day-to-day with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with gentleness, with patience. And that only happens through the grace of God. And often times the way this happens is through the ways that we truly experience something. To truly experience it versus just kind of be able to describe it. Now, I was trying to figure out a clip for this to talk about this really just living in this truth versus I'm not just kind of seeing it and I'm just trying to fake it. And there's a speech from one of the greatest movies of all time, Good Will Hunting. Here, Robin Williams gives one of the best speeches in movie history, and it has to do with what we're talking about today. I think the clip is cut right, but if it's not, y'all will hear language not in this building. Everybody just be cool. Okay.
Thought about what you.
There's long been this stereotypical kind of trite statement that you listen, you don't get it, you just had to be there. in order to get it. But that phrase exists for a reason. Certain things are just beyond our own understanding. And not just as a cool experience, like, wow, that was neat, but as a catalyst for growth. It's not just some cool thing that happened. They're a beginning that leads to somewhere else. It leads to something else. Seeing my wife for the first time on our wedding day, knowing that she was choosing me, the birth of my daughter, holding her in my arms, and I sang the doxology when I first held her because I didn't know what else to do. Lots more with her. She gets in the memos a lot. One night as we were camping in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan this last week, we were under more stars than I've ever seen probably in 10 years. It was the type of stars that had depth. You know what I mean? When, like, it's not just that you could see lots of stars. Some were bright and some were dark, and just some were barely there and some were just, wow. Certainly more than she's ever seen. And we were walking back from a potty break. We were walking back from the bathroom. She was holding my hand, and we were both just looking up at the lights. And I said, I love you, Joe. And not in a sing-songy way, not anything. She said, I love you, Daddy. And I was like, core memory right there. I was like, I'll never forget that. I was feeling stressed coming back to the office after being gone for a week. I was like, I don't even want to know how many emails I have. Oh, man, I don't know. I hope Men of Hope went well last week. I hope, all these different things are going okay. I didn't get any emails about anyone dying or breaking the building or anything. So I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. Your brain starts to spin. You get those Sunday scaries. And then I remember that night under the stars with Joanna. And it wasn't just that nice thing that happened made me feel better. It was that I realized that I don't have to be nervous about any work identity. I don't have to be nervous about what other people think of me because I get to be Joanna's dad no matter what happens. That was a starting place that I was coming from. Not just some sort of thing, aspirin that got rid of a headache. I was going, oh, because of that, I really don't have to be worried about a whole lot. And you can be like, listen, Chris, that's really nice. That's a really feel-good story. But everything that I just said, everything that Robin Williams said so eloquently in his monologue there, all of it is just an echo of the love of God. The God of the universe that made all those stars and looks at all of us instead. Looks at each and every one of us and says, masterpiece. Yeah, I made those stars, but masterpiece. What happens if you live from that place? Is your faith simply an uplifting part of your week, or is it a starting place from which you live? This is the challenge this week. Is it just like a nice thing that we're doing, or is it a starting point that is a bones-level identity piece from where we live? It's both for all of us, like I said, but the goal is the latter. And if you're new to faith or you've simply never experienced that type of place with God, I'd invite you to come to worship night this Saturday. Come and worship and truly surrender. Don't come with an agenda, just with the prayer, here, God, here I am and here you are. I'm not saying that it's going to change your life. I'm not putting too much pressure on Perry and the squad. What I am saying, I promise, because I know our worship team, that they will proclaim the name of God in Jesus, who God is, and they will proclaim who we are in relationship to that God. That's where we all would really like to start. Paul is not fighting fire with fire here when he's talking about Rome and the world around us. He's not like, join me instead of them. He's fighting fire with the universe, the power and the love of God. He's saying it's not one thing or the other. It's seeing outside of the narrow scope of the various ways that we would seek to define ourselves and instead point to our identity as the children of God. And we will go from there. Sound good? Are you alive? That wasn't a confirmation. Nothing happened, in case you guys wondered. Okay, cool. Our discussion questions for the day. Being honest, because you lie the rest of the time. Just kidding. Being honest, in your most honest self, how do you see yourself? What is your identity? What has that been for you in the past? It's been different. Don't say, child of God. Like, if that's not true for you. Like, here's the thing. We all have had things. For me, it was musician for a really long time because I studied music in college. That was where my worth came from for a long time in my life. What has that been for you? Maybe it's a job. Maybe it's a role. Maybe it's a talent. What has that been for you in the past? And two, what has been a mountaintop experience in your life? Does not have to be in church. I just listed a thing, camping. When's been that mountaintop experience that changed things for you? Where might God be in that? Could be the birth of a kid. Could be a hard thing, the death of a parent that changed things for you. Where is it? What has been a thing that's dispositionally changed you and moved you in that direction? Where might God be in that? And if you're not in the place of knowing that yet, that's okay. But it's important to identify some of these places that have sent us in a different direction, because God's certainly walking along with all of us. Sound good? Go, get thee to it. I owe you a couple minutes. Grace and peace, friends. Go be good to each other. We'll see you later.